Hello Victoria, my name's Jessica Davis and fortunately a terminated paramedic and a terminated nurse just like thousands of other workers in the state. I'd like to introduce a new e-petition to the Parliament of Victoria called Review the Vaccine Mandate Imposed on All Workers. What is an e-petition? An e-petition is an opportunity for citizens to have a voice. It is a call for action. We need the Legislative Council and the decision makers to review the current vaccine mandates, the strict measures that are in place to date, taking into consideration that the state of emergency is declared over. We have high vaccination rates, we have high immunity, and we have healthcare workers that are burning out. So taking into consideration all factors, we need the decision makers to review the current situation. And essentially what we're asking for is for the COVID-19 vaccines and also the flu vaccine directions to cease immediately, and also issue a state directive to all the employers to reinstate the employees that were terminated because of the COVID vaccine mandates. How do we get this done? We need 10,000 signatures for a parliamentary debate. So let's go to www.aw4a.com.au, sign, share across the state, and let's get this job done.
Did you know they plan to build over 3,000 wind turbines on Queensland's Great Dividing Range? Over 3,700 kilometres of new haulage roads will carve through old growth forest. Destroying forests for industrial renewables makes no sense. It doesn't have to be this way. The intact biodiverse ranges of Queensland are no place for renewables. Take 2 minutes to learn the truth about the destruction they cause. Go to rainforestreserves.org.au.
We have a massive power, and it's the power to say no.
2024 is the year when the pushback begins in earnest.
People ain't seen nothing yet. That's what I keep telling people.
It is a master-servant relationship where we, the governed, are the masters.
Doctors are gaslighting patients.
You press down enough on people for long enough, you leave them no choice but to rebel.
So, no, I don't want to forget about it, and I won't shut up about COVID.
The story of the unvaccinated is still yet to be told.
We are one people, one flag, one Australia.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the XCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp. I'm here alone tonight. Unfortunately, Adam is not with us, but he's been up in Queensland, up on the Gold Coast for the last few days, as a part of Be Kind Friday with Pat and Adam, who we've had on the show previously. They've been doing some fantastic work up there on the Gold Coast as part of Be Kind Friday. I'll just play a little clip now so everyone gets an idea of the kind of work that Adam Zara and Pat and Adam and all the team at Be Kind Friday have been doing up on the Gold Coast.
Breakfast at Paradise Point Parklands this morning. Be Kind Friday, not-for-profit organisation working to bring the community together through random acts of kindness.
This is our 11th event, so we've done 10 in Sydney. This is our very first one here on the Gold Coast. We've got our member Andrew that's taking care of the Gold Coast, but we're flying up. So we do these events once a month, and they're unreal.
Fitness groups, food businesses and other organisations bringing together hundreds of locals.
So, as always, Adam's are doing some great work. And that's the big reason why he's not here today. He's driving back from the Gold Coast tonight. So unfortunately, he's not able to be with us. But here I am. You're stuck with me tonight. So let's kick things off. We've got a great returning guest who I love speaking to. But before we get to Kevin, I'm going to bring up Buy Me a Coffee, as I always do every time we do one of these podcasts. If you want to support us, if you want to make a contribution, please head to Buy Me a Coffee. And every time you donate to us, it helps pay for the stream. It helps pay for a lot of other things that we would like to do, we plan to do, and also gives us that warm, fuzzy feeling inside. So it's a great way for you to show your support to us. So please head to Buy Me a Coffee. You can also head to our T-shirt shop and get one of our T-shirts. You can get the Kevin for the Senate T-shirt. As we've said in the past, if you do happen to buy this shirt, all profits will go to Kevin Loughrey's campaign for Parliament. So it's a really cool T-shirt, and there's some good designs there, really great quality T-shirts. So just head to xcandidates.tshirts.net.au. All those links are in the show notes if you want to head to those links. And just finally, we had a big event in Sydney at DYRSL last week. You would have seen some interviews that I did at that event. Well, it's up now on ADH TV. If you just type in Environment and Energy Forum and ADH TV, you'll get to this page here and you'll be able to watch that event. There's some shorter clips there. It's all been very well produced and it was a fantastic event. You can hear from people like Dick Smith, Barnaby Joyce, Malcolm Roberts, a whole bunch of nuclear experts like Professor Stephen Wilson, Tony Owen, Dr. Mark Ho, Dr. Peter Ridd was there. I've been talking about this for weeks, but now you can go and watch it. If you weren't able to be there, head to ADH TV and check that one out. But let's get right into it tonight because this man is a wealth of knowledge. He's always full of great information. I love having him on. It's almost an indulgence for me to have him on and just pick his brain and learn as much as I can from him. And hopefully you guys can be on that journey with me and hear it from him. Mr. Kevin Loughrey, welcome back to the XCandidates, my friend.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I've got a big head, but thanks to you, I'm blushing. But yeah, thank you for that. I hope I live up to the expectations.
Look, mate, I'm sure you will. So just let everyone know, if you want to know anything about Kevin, head to kevinloughrey.com.au. Again, that link will be in the show notes. All the information that we're talking about tonight will probably be up on his website, including a whole bunch of other bits of information. It's almost like an encyclopedia going to Kevin's website. So if you ever want to learn anything, head to kevinloughrey.com.au. And if you want to delve deeper into anything that we discuss, head there and find out about that. But Kevin, you were down in Sydney on last Sunday. You were at the Environment Forum.
I was. It was fantastic. It was a great opportunity to meet a whole lot of very interesting people. You had a terrific client list there, or talent list. And yeah, I stayed the whole day and it was just fabulous. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Now, seeing you in person, I know you're a big, tall man. Mate, can you just maybe move your laptop down a little bit? You look like
yeah, sure.
Right at the bottom of the screen there. You look like you're about 5 foot tall. But
no, that's fine.
Now, we're going to talk about some submissions that you're going to be making to the New South Wales Independent Planning Commission. And
that's correct.
We're going to try and encourage some people or anyone out there listening to make similar submissions, and you might be able to explain to them how they do that.
Yeah, sure.
What is the importance of this? Why are we making these submissions? What are your thoughts on this whole issue?
Well, by law, if there are 50 objections to a particular project, they have to hold a meeting which will involve 3 commissioners from the Independent Planning Commission sitting in a hall. The whole thing is very well choreographed. Each person who makes an objection is invited to speak at that meeting if they can make it. Otherwise, they can pass over, say, no, look, I've already put in my submission. I don't need to speak to the commissioners. On the other hand, they can delegate a proxy. For example, if 3 people were sympathetic to my point of view, they could say, look, I would like Kevin Loughrey to present on our behalf. Now, each speaker gets 5 minutes. So if 3 people were to say, I want Kevin Loughrey to be my proxy, then I get 4 by 5 minutes, which is 20 minutes to speak to the commissioners, to put our point of view across. I drove up to Dunedoo on Wednesday, and I presented to 3 commissioners there. It was very well done. It was well organised. And unfortunately, though, they only give you 5 minutes. And you will see, we're going to go through some of that tonight. But it was a real wham, bam, and thank you, ma'am. I actually went to the fellow who was controlling audio visual and said, look, could I have the slide clicker, please? Because I wanted to flash through each slide very quickly. And he said, oh, no, I couldn't let you do that because you might panic and you might, go backwards or forwards or whatever. And so I was half thinking, have you ever been shot at, mate? You talk about panic. But anyway, he
We should
I said, "All
remind
right."
everyone. We should remind everyone that you're a lieutenant colonel. You've been sent
Yeah,
overseas
32
as part
years
of
in the
the.
army. Yeah. And when I was developing a silencer, I actually was shot at by Sergeant Fogarty at around about 100 meters down the range. He was putting bullets about 300 millimeters to the right-hand side of my ear. So, yeah, it's not a pleasant experience, I can assure you. And I've been down the butts when we've been shooting, and I tell you, you'd have to be a very brave person to go up over the top of the butts. I have enormous respect for all of those people who fought for us in those 2 world wars. But anyway, look, getting back to this. So I took my place at the lectern, and sure enough, this guy was super slow. And so I turned to the commissioners and said, look, could I have extra time, because these slides are coming up too slowly. And he even put one slide going backwards, by the way. He got all rattled after that. So anyway, it was a terrific experience. I got to meet a whole lot of super people. There were about 30 people at the meeting at least, and they were really terrific people. I also Grant Piper, who was quite active during the Reckless Renewables rally. That's where I first sort of met Grant in person. I'd seen him on Zoom and stuff like that beforehand. Anyway, he invited my wife and I to stay at his place overnight on the Tuesday night. And that was really, really lovely also. Just fantastic. He's got a farm about 5,500 acres at a place called Coolah.
Yeah, Grant's a great guy. He's the chairman of the National Rational Energy Network, who, as you said, organised the Reckless Renewables rallies and also organised the Environment and Energy Forum. So they're doing some great work. He's a former military man like yourself.
Yes,
and he's just a genuinely good guy. I've interviewed him on Commanding the Narrative if anyone wants to check out that interview. But it's sad to see what he's up against out in the central Western Rana renewable energy zones. I mean, this is a zone around Dunedoo and Dubbo and Mudgee and all these other Coolah, 20,000 square kilometers of renewable projects going in there, and they have no representation at all. And he's doing his best to fight back and push back against it. But he's a great guy, and we should be supporting people like Grant. And I'm sure there's many other people out there like Grant. We should be helping these people, not kicking them in the guts.
I agree. Look, you haven't seen the half of it yet, though. They've passed acts in the New South Wales Parliament which make the way for Project 2030. And in Project 2030 is, and this is hearsay, you'd need to follow it up to make it, to find out whether this is real, but something like 30% of the farmers' land are going to be put aside for the environment. We are presently seeing the erosion of property rights left, right and centre with regard to farmers. This native title and with the things that they did in the Kyoto Agreement, which Malcolm Roberts is constantly railing about, quite rightly, it's going to get a lot worse if we don't, basically vote these people out of office and put people in who see the world through our lens.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So let's get back to the Independent Planning Commission.
Yep.
Now you can go to their website. It's this one here, and if you scroll down, you'll find current and recent cases, and this is where you can make submissions. This is what Kevin will be talking about tonight, and we're going to be focusing on the Burrawa Solar Farm. This one here. So you have 4 days left to make submissions. So maybe don't hang around. Get on there tonight if you can, and submit your submissions. Why did you want to focus on this one, Kevin?
Because it involved primarily solar, and I'd already done a rough scoping study of an 8 gigawatt pumped hydro solar project that was proposed by the New South Wales government. And by the way, Burrawa could be part of a constellation of solar farms, which is actually this 8 gigawatt system. Burrawa itself is 600 megawatts, and they're going to put in a battery energy storage system, which will be 1,200 megawatt hours. In other words, if the Birrell system is not producing, this battery will provide 2 hours of power before it runs out. And that's not actually real, because batteries can't be discharged fully. So you're most probably going to get about 80% of that if the capacity of the battery is indeed 1,200 megawatt hours. So that's why I decided I would pick on that. But also, as you'll see, once we get into this, this is really strategic, because if I can win my argument with this one, then all of the so-called renewable energy projects will collapse like a house of cards. You'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. And I'd like viewers to put pressure on the Independent Planning Commission to do its job, because I have a feeling that what I'm about to show you will not be politically acceptable to the Independent Planning Commission or the government of New South Wales, and they will do their best to shirk their responsibilities.
So you mentioned your slides. You've sent them through to me, and this is what you're going to talk about tonight. I'm not going to rush. Hopefully, I'm a bit faster with the slides than old mate at the commission. So let's bring it up. I'll let you take over.
It starts off by saying that net zero aims to reduce human emissions of what are referred to as greenhouse gases. Now, a key component of this reduction strategy is to use wind and solar systems rather than coal-fired baseload power stations. And they also, concurrent with this, is that it is an assertion that wind and solar is cheaper than coal-fired baseload power stations. And that came about as a consequence of a paper written by some people down at the CSIRO, and that paper is called GenCost, and it gets updated regularly. I've read GenCost, and I find it to be basically a very poor piece of scholarship, verging on the mendacious. That means it's full of lies. So speaking of lies, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, it's based, net zero is predicated on 3 falsehoods, and listeners and viewers need to, this is what we should focus on. The first one, can you move on to the next slide?
Yep.
Okay, the first one is that CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, which are referred to generically as greenhouse gases, appreciably warms the Earth's atmosphere. Now, I've given you a list there of people, and some of these people I know personally, for example, Will Happer. Dr. John Clauser is a Nobel laureate, and he is an esteemed atmospheric physicist. And he has written a paper which completely debunks the idea that CO2 in any way appreciably affects the Earth's climate, in particular warming of the Earth's atmosphere. I wonder, Stephen, you had my webpage there. Could you possibly bring my webpage up for a moment, if that's convenient? If not, we can move on. But you were able to do it sleight of hand before. You're most adroit at this. Okay, now if you go down the left-hand side, you'll see there's a thing called climate change. If you click on that, okay, and you come to that. Now, if you slide down a little bit, you'll actually find a link to Professor Clauser's paper. It's not terribly clear on my screen here, but you most probably can see it better. You're getting warm now, I reckon.
Yeah.
There it is. Now, if viewers like to, they can go to my webpage, click on climate change, go there, and you can bring up Professor Clauser's paper and you can read it. I have read this, and I assure you it is entirely cogent. I did thermodynamics to 4th year university with honours, and Professor Clauser, of course, is many, many streets ahead of me. But everything he says there makes a great deal of sense. And the bottom line is, here we have a number of distinguished atmospheric physicists saying carbon dioxide cannot possibly appreciably warm the Earth's atmosphere.
But hang on, Kevin. The science is settled on this. Haven't you heard?
Yeah, I have. You know, if you give me enough money, I'll tell you that it's settled too. Actually, I lie. I can't be bought. But yeah, that's what's happened. Scientists, so-called scientists, have prostituted their ethics and scientific integrity for
Do you really think that's what it comes down to? They've just been bought out.
Oh, absolutely. Look, if I know that CO2 can't possibly appreciably warm the Earth's atmosphere, they know it. I mean, Professor Klaus is the world's expert, as is Will Happer and Richard Lindzen. You ought to hear Richard talk. Richard, actually, there's an excellent interview between Richard and Jordan Peterson. You really should listen to it, because Jordan Peterson is a truly exceptional man. The questions he asks are quite incisive. You know, he really gets into it. And you can see that Jordan is understanding 99.9% of what Richard is saying. But yeah, Richard is unequivocal as well. Richard says, listen, it's just one huge fraud. And that's what Will Happer says as well, as does John Clauser. Watch now. If you go back to my slides again.
Yep.
Go to the next page. Next slide. Now, if you go to climatethemovie.net, you'll find this movie there. You'll see that, and you click on the arrow and watch the movie. It goes for around about 1.5 hours. And to me, it was riveting the first time I saw it. I've now seen it about 5 times because I attend a whole lot of functions and this gets shown. So it's gotten a wee bit boring for me. But all of the personalities that I just described, that's John Clauser, Will Happer, Richard Lindzen. I think Ian Plimer is on there as well. I know Ian. I think he's a fantastic bloke. He and I spoke at one particular function up on the Gold Coast, so we got to know each other a bit better. But Ian's got the most delightful sense of humour, and he's an excellent presenter. I guess all those years of being a professor pay off. But yeah, so viewers, if you want to see the real truth, go to Climate the Movie and have a look at it. It's free, and it's just a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I just typed it in. You can find it on YouTube. It's pretty easy to find. So, yeah. I mean, believe it or not, Kevin, I haven't had the chance to watch it either yet. So I know a lot of people have been raving on about it. Yeah, I just I might actually ask you this question now, because I was going to ask you this at the end. I've seen some statistics when people are asked, like everyday voters, when they're asked, what's the most important issue for you? What influences your vote? And often they're given 3 options, and then statistically they come out with a percentage. And obviously at the moment, housing affordability and cost of living is always at the top. Climate change and the environment is generally about 10 or 11%. Do you think a big problem in this whole debate is that most people just don't care? They're not interested in all this data and information?
Where my tactic, I guess it is to make people aware that this climate change fraud has caused the cost of electricity to go up almost 6 times. You're paying almost 6 times more than you should be for your electricity. And it all started with that idiot Rudd, was pushed on by an even bigger idiot, Gillard. And then you had the feckless and hopeless Libs and Nationals coming in. And now you've got Labor on steroids, trying to wreck the economy, spending billions of dollars of borrowed money when we're $1.3 trillion in debt, owing to hopeless management of all of those aforementioned parties. So that's the only way you'll get the attention of the man in the street. When they find out, hey, I'm $2,000 poorer this year because of electricity, the cost of electricity and petrol as well. You know, I said we're digressing a little bit, but this is relevant. I sent a proposal to the Department of Defence, to the Minister, the Secretary, the Chief of the Defence Force, and the 3 service chiefs, suggesting to them that they should look at the possibility of taking carbonaceous waste from municipal dumps and turning it into liquid fuel using a range of technologies that are readily available. Because Australia's only got about 24 days of liquid fuel, in reserve. If we get cut off, we've had it, right? And so I'm saying to them, look, wouldn't it make sense for you to spend some of your defence budget securing Australia's fuel supplies? Because my calculations tell me that we could produce possibly, and this is, I need to confirm this, but hypothetically, on the back of a sort of a pad, I worked out that we if we were to take all the municipal waste, all the carbonaceous municipal waste in Australia, we could produce twice as much liquid fuel as we are presently consuming. That's something, isn't it? And what's more, if you did this across Australia at major municipalities, your fuel production facilities would be distributed so they wouldn't make an easy target. And that's really important from a defence point of view. But, you know, I haven't received a single reply. I sent them by registered mail, and they haven't even got the courtesy to reply back and say, look, you know, we think you're dreaming, son. And besides which, you should have retired by now, so goodbye. They haven't even got the courtesy to do that. That's the state of our government today. When I was in the army, it was mandatory that you had to reply to a correspondence from a citizen, even if it was just to say, look, thank you very much for your concern and yada, yada, yada. And, you know, if I can help you anytime, let me know. And you try to be friends with the civilian person, but you've got an obligation to reply to people who write your letters. It takes time and effort to write a letter, and it costs, of course, if you send it by registered mail these days with Australia Post charges. So yeah, but they don't even reply. Anyway, let's get back to the slides, because I'm famous for going off on tributaries.
just quickly back to the climate movie. Pauline's made a comment in the chat. You get done for misinformation for sharing the link to movie on Facebook. So
yes, that's right. That's because Alphabet is owned by large asset management companies that are making a mozza with this fraud. They're also, by the way, closely linked to the Chinese Communist Party. And at the back of all of this, the IPCC is controlled, just like the WHO, by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the Chinese communists have said that they will reduce their emissions after 2050. But they've already have it as their stated aim that by 2049, they will be the supreme power of the world. And if they can destroy Western economies, and they're doing a good job of it, because there's no shortage of idiots in the Western economies and avaricious people who would, you know, sell their grandmother and claim she's a virgin. You've got no shortage of these people, and the consequence of that is that the Western economies are going down the toilet, and China is laughing all the way to the bank. We're spending billions of dollars of borrowed money to buy hardware from China. It's just nuts. It's suicide.
Got another comment here from Tony. She says the ministers no longer answer to the citizens; they answer to their investors, which is a very sad state. But let's get back to your slides. Let's move on to line number 2.
Line number 2 is that the Earth's atmosphere is warming. No, actually, it's cooling, and that came out at the Sunday gathering at DY. There was some really good stuff that came out there. If you move, by the way, Alexandra Marshall, I went and had a chat to her from ADH TV, and she asked me to send this to her. So we'll see where we get. But look, this is a plot of temperature from 1880 approximately, I think it could be 1870 something, almost to the present day, using those temperature measuring stations, which you can see on the right-hand side. This is important because those temperature measuring stations are not surrounded by urbanization. The moment you build buildings and, you know, lay concrete and bitumen, the temperature warms up, and it's got nothing to do with climate change. It's got a lot to do with trapped heat and the absorption of black objects and so forth, of solar radiation. So if you use that temperature data, and by the way, the stuff
don't say that too loud, Kevin. They'll start ripping up all the asphalt and pavements and footpaths because they'll say it's warming the planet.
Well, you know, you could always use the clinker from cement to add it to bitumen to cause the bitumen to be a whiter color, which would reduce its absorption of radiation. But let's not go there. Let's stay on track. We've got the green on the left-hand side there, and that comes from the Australian Archives. Then we move on to the black area, and initially that was the Postmaster General's department. And my father used to be a postmaster, as did his father. And they used to take these measurements all the time at the post office. And then they would send it by telegram to a central collection area. So I've been historically involved in this. Anyway, you can see that the temperature has been steadily dropping. Now, near the end, you can see that the temperature then starts to go up after 1998. And the reason that happened was that the BOM went and changed out its analog measuring systems for digital. But they just didn't leave it at that. They also changed the size of the housing in which the instrumentation was placed. And this different size housing actually gives you an exaggerated temperature. It's a hotter thing. The other thing that happened was that they claimed that they hadn't run the two systems in parallel, which is nuts, because if you want to compare anything, you actually have to calibrate the new system against the old system. Otherwise, your trends go out the window. And I have a feeling somebody was doing this deliberately, because the new digital system, it was found, would not record temperatures below -10 degrees centigrade, which once again would elevate the average temperature. So anyway, as a consequence of much haranguing and a Freedom of Information submission, which went on for many years, the BOM has now admitted that they did actually have two systems running in parallel at certain places. And then it was found that the data, the digital systems were reporting a hotter temperature than were the analog systems. So the consequence of all of this is that upward movement after 1998 was most probably not as severe as the graph would indicate. It could have gone up a little bit because the sun is cycling, but from that data you can see that the temperature in Australia over the last 140 years has been gradually dropping. Okay, so if you now move on to the next slide, some people, when I put this out, they said, oh yes, but that's down here in Australia, and the rest of the world it's warming up. And I said, oh, that's an interesting theory. So let's look at the next one. The temperature measuring stations you can see over on the right. This is the US Climatology Network from 1910 to 2018. And the person, by the way, these graphs came about largely from a wonderful person called Tony Heller, whom I've corresponded with on one occasion. I'd love to meet him and shake his hand and tell him what a terrific bloke he is. He is fabulous. He's in the climate movie too, by the way. Tony created all of this data, and I was able to download this data plus a software program which Tony had written, which allows you to create your own graphs and to modify your own graphs. And that software will run on Windows, Apple, and on Linux. I use Linux. I have a feeling Tony most probably does too. So anyway, you can see there on the left-hand side that the temperature has been steadily decreasing. You see it's gone up in various places. It goes up quite savagely, but the general, it goes down more than it goes up. And the result of that is what you see there. So in other words, in the Northern Hemisphere, on the other side of the globe, they're experiencing a similar trend to what we are experiencing in Australia. Next slide.
Can I just cut in quickly? If we look at the one on the left-hand side, if you go from, say, for example, the year 1970, could you argue that the temperature is going up?
Yeah, you could. And Professor Plimer makes that point, that it depends where you start measuring the temperature.
Yeah, that's right.
And so if you were a climate alarmist, that's the graph you would show you. That's the graph they would show. And the line would be going upwards.
What about the other argument that they use, that that the instruments that they were using to record temperature in the past weren't accurate enough, or they'd be left out in the sun all day? Or I mean, the climate alarmists always make the argument that the data from, say, 100 years ago is not adequate. What do you say about that?
I say it's baloney. The Stevenson screen, by the way, was developed in the late 1800s. And if you're in a car, like my Toyota, I have a RAV4, which just about bankrupted us buying it, but I love it. I have a RAV4 and it exaggerates the speed. But if I'm doing 110, I'm actually doing something like 106. But if my speedometer says I'm doing 110, and then it says I'm doing 105, even though it's inaccurate, I've still slowed down. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in other words, so long as those thermometers stayed consistently inaccurate, in other words, they didn't change them out every second month for another thermometer, then the trend is the trend, even if the figures they're showing are not accurate. And so that brings us, we were using analog from 1878 through to about 1998. And that analog was zeroed by using ice, which is 0 degrees centigrade, yes, or 32 degrees Fahrenheit it would have been in those days, and 212 degrees Fahrenheit for boiling water. So in other words, they calibrated their thermometers. The thermometers were accurate easily within 1 degree Fahrenheit. And as I said, even if they weren't inaccurate, so long as you're using the same thermometer, if the thermometer is registering a cooler temperature, then it's cooling. Simple as that.
And look, people in those days, they really took pride in their work, and
absolutely
they tried to be
My
as
dad
accurate
did.
as possible. Yeah, look at how they built the Harbour Bridge, and I suppose you might even say their tools were primitive back in those days, but they probably built it better than we could these days. So
they used rivets, which is really important, because even to this day, I'm a mechanical engineer, and obviously I've done plastic deformation calculations and all the rest of it. So I've done the really sophisticated calculations and theory. Nothing beats rivets, because a riveted structure can move. When you weld things, you run into all sorts of issues with heat affected zones and fatigue. So yeah, that Sydney Harbour Bridge is going to be around for an eternity, believe me.
Yeah,
unless someone bombs it.
I've done surveying on that bridge, and I know it moves. It moves quite considerably. I've done something very dangerous right now. I'll put the link in the chat if anyone wants to call in and ask Kevin a question or make a comment. But let's go back to your slides. So we've gone through this one. So the next one, this is
the next slide.
More data.
Okay, so you can see the red dot there. That's Durban, South Africa. It's on the east coast of South Africa. And that's from 1885 to 1995. And you can see it's distinctly going down. Note, though, that near the end, it's starting to go up again, which is, by the way, similar to what we saw in Australia. But overall, the temperature is much lower there than it was back in 1885. Same measuring equipment. Okay, so
and just because it's going up again doesn't mean let's just panic. It's just a natural occurrence. I mean, Dr. Peter Reid talks about this with the coral at the Great Barrier Reef. Some years it's high, some years you have a die-off. That's just a natural process. But people take that data and they use it selectively, like we spoke about before, and they manipulate these graphs.
Yep, and you can imagine if you chose that part down at the where it takes a big dip and then starts going up, and you chose that to be from where you measured your thing, you'd say, oh, holy hell, the world's going to end. But no, it was much hotter back in 1885. And by the way, that was the case in Australia as well. Very hot around the late 1800s. Okay, moving on. And this is Sierra Leone, which is on the west side of Africa, up the top there. I almost went to Sierra Leone to do sand mining. I was with a big sand mining company and they had interests in Sierra Leone. Fortunately, I didn't go. Those that didn't report favorably of it. It was a bit hairy and it was also a bit primitive. So you can see there, that's a downward trend once again. And you see how it's sort of going up and then it's going down again. And that's from 1885 to 1995. If we move to the next one.
Well, I just want to make a quick comment there. From all these graphs that you've shown us throughout different parts of the world, it seems to be a similar trend.
Yes, we'll get to that. That's my climactic statement when we get to the end of this. Okay, now this is really interesting because this is from the Japanese Meteorological Agency. And the Japanese are really fastidious. And this is down in Antarctica. By the way, in Antarctica, there is an awful lot of volcanic action happening under the water. Professor Arthur Vitorito gave a presentation to my group some months ago. Wonderful fellow, lives in Florida, got up at 4 a.m. in the morning to speak to us. But even with that volcanic activity happening down in Antarctica, you can see it's a downward trend. Last year, they had the coldest temperatures on record. And that's in Antarctica. That's got nothing to do with, they keep on talking about the polar vortex and how it's dropping and everything. No, it's getting really cold in Antarctica.
Kevin, we've got an interesting question here from Pauline. She's asked, how will a cooling climate affect food production?
Oh, very badly. There is actually a little bit of a plus, though, and that is that the oceans are warm. The oceans have got many, many times more energy in them than has the land, and the oceans lag behind. And plus we've got increased volcanic action happening under the oceans, most probably as a consequence of a collapsing magnetic field of the sun, which is part of a solar minimum, a grand solar minimum. So we've got a situation where the oceans are warm and the land is cold. The consequence of that is you've got this moist, warm air coming off the oceans, and as soon as it hits landfall, it just falls out like a bucket. So you get flooding. Lots of flooding, torrential rain, and we've certainly seen that in the last couple of years. So it could get very wet for a while, but once the oceans start to cool, then we're in for an extended drought, like the centennial drought that happened around 1900. I would like us to build lots and lots of dams down the eastern seaboard. And I would very much like us to be pumping water from the eastern seaboard in responsible quantities into the Murray-Darling system. We could actually triple our productive land if we gave the farmers lots and lots of water. And that would also reduce the cost of production.
I would love to be infrastructure minister one day and be able to implement all those projects. I do that, and I do a high-speed rail. But that's a discussion for another time. Let's go back to your slides. This is even more data that's very similar to what you've been showing.
Now, this
already.
is Brazil. Yeah. And you can see it's going down. You notice how it goes up just there. It goes right down and then it comes back up, just like the other graphs. Pauline says, I may need higher gum boots.
Good on you, Pauline.
Waders for trout fishing, Pauline. Okay, so we move on to the next one. Okay, this is lie number 3, and we'll take a little digression here in a moment. But the lie is that wind and solar are cheaper than brown coal. And the CSIRO have put out a paper called GenCost, which is updated typically annually. And it asserts that wind and solar generations are cheaper than coal. I've actually studied these papers, and I find them to be seriously flawed in logic to the point of being mendacious. That means they're big fibs. I've provided you with a rough scoping study of a proposed 8 gigawatt pumped hydro system. If you go to my webpage, you'll find it there. You can click on it and you can download it and have a read of it if anybody's got an interest in it. But I wonder if we could digress at this stage and go across to that other presentation that I forwarded to you late this afternoon, shortly before we came on here. Okay, now look, this is the ideal way by which you should generate electricity. And this is effectively what we were doing in New South Wales before Kevin Rudd had a sudden rush of blood to the head. Not sure which one, but he had a sudden rush of blood to the head and decided that the world was going to end, along with apologising for something that we didn't need to apologise for and making an idiot of himself. He also started work in destroying our national energy grid. Now, the black line there is baseload power output. And if you want your baseload power systems to produce the cheapest possible electricity, you run them at 100% of their capacity 100% of the time. That's taking into account shutdowns, of course. The red
Kevin,
line...
Can we come back to this? I've just got a caller who's called through.
Sure, go.
A very good friend of mine and former, current host of Commanding the Narrative, Mr. Richard Storch. Hello, Richard. You wanted to make a comment?
Hiya, Richard. You're on mute, Richard.
You're on mute, mate. Can you get off mute, Richard?
Does he rely on you, Stephen, to come off mute? Do you have the power to turn him off mute?
I can't turn him off because
right.
he's turned himself off. So, Richard, down the bottom there'll be a button that says mute or unmute. There you go. You got it.
Oh,
how you going, mate? You're very red tonight. You're in ex-candidate mode.
Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you.
Have we got it now?
Yep.
Good. I wanted to ask Kevin, I wanted to take Kevin down a rabbit hole.
Oh, yep. Please don't do that.
We could be here all night. Go for it, Richard. Go for it, mate. I love a challenge.
Yeah. I'm still getting feedback. I have to get my wife in here.
We'll bring you back on, Richard, because it seems like you've got the connection's not so great.
Problem,
yeah. I'll bring you back on. So while he sorts that out, Kevin.
I love this show. It's terrific.
All right, let's go back to this.
Yeah, look. And for the viewers, the red line is demand. And you'll see at night, demand drops off. And when the demand drops off, you use your surplus capacity in your baseload power to pump water up to Lake Jindabyne. And then when the people start waking up and turning on their breakfast appliances and so forth, and the industry starts, the demand exceeds the supply of the baseload power. And what you do then is you let the water, which you've previously pumped uphill, run downhill to provide you with the additional capability. And you can see I do that twice. You have this peak and then it goes down, then you have another peak, and then you go back into the evening mode where you're going to return the water back up to the catchment area where you do your pumped hydro. Now, on top of that, you also have gas-fired generators, what are called firming, and you can, if you get an unusual demand or you're not lucky enough to have hydro, you use these other systems to augment your baseload power. But your baseload power is chugging along, producing electricity at about 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And you know the additional is your pumped hydro runs at about 0.64 efficiency. So in other words, for every megawatt hour you put into your pumped hydro, you get 0.64 of a megawatt hour back out. So it's a bit more expensive, of course. And that's how you should run your electricity system. That's what we were doing. That's why we had the cheapest power in the world.
So let's expand on the gas part of these peaking plants, gas peaking plants. So you can turn them on and off very, very quickly at a fairly reasonable cost. Whereas with coal, you can't do that. You can't turn coal off.
Because it's running on a steam turbine. Also, by the way, you have spinning masses. You've got a huge amount of energy stored in spinning masses. So while your gas system is powering up, because gas systems can't power up in an instant, they do take a finite amount of time to come up to full capacity. Your spinning mass takes up the slack while you're getting the gas going. And then once you've got the gas going, you're home free. The moment that the demand drops off, all you do is you just turn off the gas and it just spins down. So it can be very quickly turned off.
Got a comment here on the Rumble. Dialmaz, I love these Rumble names. I don't know how they come up with them, but he says, "Hey fellas, love your work. Any thoughts on the hydrogen plant being made in Adelaide?"
Yeah, I've got a lot. The very first thing is you can create hydrogen broadly by two means: electrolysis of water or by breaking down methane. Methane's CH4. And so if you can separate the carbon from the methane, you end up with 2 hydrogen molecules. That takes energy. But if you're doing it by electrolysis, you've got another problem, and that's poisoning of your electrodes. So you've got to use pure water, or you've got to have a means of purifying the water before you do the electrolysis. You've got to demineralize the water, and that's expensive and problematic because the demineralizer then has to be cleaned or has to be replaced. So when you're making hydrogen, it's not without its challenges. And then having made it, you've got to compress it because hydrogen is an extremely light gas, and at atmospheric, there's not much energy in it. If you want to drive a car, you've got to compress it to around about, in the old measurement, 4,000 pounds per square inch. So if you can imagine, you've now got a pressurized cylinder in your car and you're screaming along at 100 odd kilometers an hour and you strike something hard and heavy, there's a good chance that your 4,000 pounds per square inch cylinder is going to erupt. And it's also possible during the process of this that there'll be sparks and hot things, and you will turn into a Zeppelin right there on the highway. Look, I need to look at the figures, but to me, this seems like BS. Honestly, I know Twiggy Forrester evidently has been given about $20 million by our government of taxpayers' money, so he can go off and play with himself and hydrogen. Look, there is no point in going to hydrogen. Really, there is no point, because as I've just shown you, carbon dioxide does not appreciably warm the Earth's atmosphere. And liquid fuels, hydrocarbon fuels, are by far the most energy dense, easiest to handle, safest to handle. Petrol's not all that safe, but it's still safe. We've managed systems that make it very safe for people to put into their car and use. There's absolutely no value in going down the hydrogen route that I can see. Now, I'm not infallible and I might be wrong, but that's what I know about it. And really, I wouldn't, I would just continue to use diesel and Abtur and petrol.
All right, let's try Richard again. Richard, you're going to have to unmute yourself because I can't do that. But can you hear us this time?
I can hear you once,
good.
Which is what is actually the desired outcome.
You're really clear.
Kevin, my question to you is, are you aware of the 3 sort of mooted projects like the Burdekin Transfer Scheme, the Bradfield Scheme, and the Clarence Transfer Scheme? Are you aware of all of those?
Absolutely. I was actually asked to help at one stage with a fellow who was in the National Party, and I got involved with that. I met with an old fellow who had all of these old original drawings. But yes, that's what we should be doing. It's amazing, isn't it, that they did all of that on horseback. They actually did all the surveying and everything. I mean, now we've got satellites and God knows what. And these guys worked it out in the days of when people rode around on horses.
Yeah, it's incredible. And these ideas have been around for nearly a century.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
See, as a patriot, my inclination is that we need a national project that everyone can get behind, that we can all feel that we're a part of, like the Snowy was.
I agree. Look, Richard, we have spent now something like $160 billion on stuff that we purchased from China. $160 billion. What could we do with $160 billion?
Arithmetic vehemently on that. I think
Go for it, mate.
The real figure is probably multiples of that.
I fear you're right.
I think that there's been an enormous amount of cost transfer onto consumers.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
no, you're right.
If you were going to cost it like an actuary, and put in all the costs that have been inflicted on the community, as well as future liabilities, I think we've spent a lot more than 160 billion. I think we'd
Isn't it enough to make you cry?
Well, it's an exercise in politicians' vanity. And we've allowed
it's destroying this country. It's destroying this country.
Well, it's destroying every country, but it's like they're really excelling themselves in this country. I'll agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean,
that wasn't much of a rabbit hole. We're in vehement agreement. Yeah. Look, I get really excited at exactly that prospect. And what's more interesting, Richard, can I have your permission, Stephen, to go off on another little trip?
Go for it, Kevin.
Stephen trip. Look, I was actually a sand miner on Stradbroke Island, and we used to go to church every Sunday as a family. We went to the Anglican church at Dunwich, and the chap there who was the priest was a fellow called Kit Bunker. Kit was of English origin, but an Australian, and he was a geophysicist, and he worked at the University of St. Lucia. And so after church was over, we would have socials, and of course I became quite good friends with Kit. And he invited me to come over to St. Lucia University. And this is leading somewhere, by the way, fellas. I'm getting to it now. Kit had, for a PhD, worked out a way by which it was possible to cut through rock using about 1/10 the amount of energy that one needs to typically with a rock cutter. And I looked at this, and by the way, it's absolutely valid. It's not smoke and mirrors. What he came up with was fingers which would go through the rock, and these were tungsten carbide fingers, and then a wedge would go through the pillars and snap the pillars off. And that requires a heck of a lot less energy than if you just scoop through the rock. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Now, the reason this is so relevant is that we could, using this technology, and even if using ordinary technology these days, but we could build a 2-meter pipe through the ranges easily for a fraction of what we're presently spending on these renewable projects. And we could have these pipes going at strategic points to do the Burdekin, the Clarence, and all that sort of stuff that you just alluded to, Richard. It's doable now, whereas before, in the 30s, of course, it would have been a massive undertaking. Although, having said that, isn't it amazing what they achieved in the Snowy Mountain scheme? I think it's about 500 kilometres of tunnels or something they built. And they did it all with relatively crude technology. Think what we could do today. Is it entirely achievable?
Well, the thing is, water is money in the hands of farmers. Although my friend, who's an ex-board member of the Murray-Darling, assures me that the price of water has fallen from $8,000 a gig, I think it is, to $45 a gig. So all the speculators in the water market have been handed their backsides, which
well,
he's
there is
delighted
some justice
about.
After all. There's a God after all, because I really disagree
he
with
believes
the water
in
licenses.
and, if not vengeance.
Yeah, I disagreed with the water licenses being taken off the farmers and put out onto the open market. That's just lunacy. You could end up with a foreign power owning our water, like the Chinese.
If you create an opportunity for speculators, spivs, and carpetbaggers, they'll take it, as we've seen with the whole energy market.
Richard, we better get back to our presentation. This has been an interesting, discussion. I am famous for that, by the way. Yeah, but I'm also guilty of going off on interesting, tributaries, I call them.
Well, I call it the Jewish equation, following the filthy lucre, which is where you usually find the truth behind anything. But I would also like to ask you, Kevin, about your thoughts about the feasibility of the Clarence scheme, because that's probably the most interesting one for New South Wales.
Yes.
Because of the hydro aspect of it.
Yeah. It's feasible. There's no if, buts, or maybes. It was feasible back then. It's even more feasible now with modern technology and with the ability with satellites and to be able to do very, very accurate geo mapping, that the risk has been minimized. There is absolutely no doubt that scheme could be made a reality. No doubt at all. And with virtually zero technical risk. In fact, Stephen's involved in projects around Sydney that utilise the technology we're talking about.
That's why
they're building tunnels for cars.
That's why I can't wait to be infrastructure minister one day, because we can build this stuff.
Listen, Stephen, I wouldn't let you be the minister. I will make you the secretary. That's where the power is.
Yeah.
Wherever I need to be, whatever I need to do, just put me there and let's get this country.
It's too soft a ministry for you. You know, you'll need to do something a bit more challenging than that. I mean, Alba had infrastructure because all you have to do is go around and make the odd speech and cut ribbons. I mean, it's
all right.
It's where you put your most brain dead minister.
Where the action happens.
on that note, Richard, we'll let you go because I know what happens when we start talking about Alba. You'll fire up. So anyone watching, go and watch the last Commanding the Narrative with Richard, where we really fire up at each other, and that was a really good one. So thanks for coming on, Richard.
Yeah, lovely talking to you, Richard. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, and it was great to be with you. Goodbye.
All right. Good night.
See you, mate.
Good night. So if anyone wants to be like Richard and call in, you can and contribute to this conversation. Look, I mean, I'm blown away sitting here watching Kevin being able to answer every question that comes his way, whether it be from me or from the people in the chat or Richard. So if you want to call in, ask Kevin a question, jump on it because he's here right now and he can answer anything. It's just amazing how you're able to do that, Kevin. But let's get back to the slides. So we're up to this slide. Are you finished with this slide? You want to move on, or you have any?
Yeah. If you move on. Okay. Now they're talking about pumped hydro, and the idea of pumped hydro is, as I said, when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, you're going to let water run downhill. And if you want to produce 8 gigawatts of power, you've got to have a fairly sizable amount of water stored up there on the hill. And the average height of the Great Dividing Range is around 600 meters. It is higher in places and it's lower in places, but the approximate average is about 600, maybe 700 meters. And if we assume a drop of 400 meters and a pumping efficiency of 0.64, then the energy in one day is 8 gigawatt by 24 hours, which is 192 gigawatt hours. The water necessary for you to store is 8,259 gigaliters if you want to produce 8 gigawatts for 24 hours. Okay. A gigaliter, by the way, is 1,000 million liters, just so we get that in thing. Warragamba Dam has an approximate capacity of 2,065 gigaliters. In other words, you've got to just to run this for one day, pretend that the sun isn't shining and the wind's not blowing. If you had to produce 8 gigawatts of power continuously for 24 hours, you're going to need 4 Warragamba dams worth of storage perched 600 meters above sea level. Now, there's no way that can work. And they're talking about a pumped hydro. So somebody hasn't done even basic sums. Can you move on to the next slide?
I just want to cut in.
Yeah.
Why? Is it just incompetence, or this is just an opportunity for to make a quick buck, and they're just trying to milk it for everything that they can? Like, if you're an engineer and you can do these calculations, surely they're speaking to some sort.
Well, I reckon there are a lot of power engineers walking around shaking their heads. They must probably have left. They've been fired or they've retired. Look, you learn about this in your first year at university. Much of the maths I just showed you there, you dealt with in high school. You can work all of this out from first principles. Okay, let's just have a quick squeeze at costing. The cost of solar panel installation for a house, a 5 kilowatt system, is approximately $8,000, of which $4,000, by the way, is paid for by REC credits. That's by the taxpayer and by the electricity consumer, which your guest just before was alluding to. So when you do the maths, you come down to, if you want to produce 8 gigawatts, you're going to need 22 million home systems to produce a pumped hydro system delivering 8 gigawatts 24 hours per day. This will cost you $177 billion. For that, you could build 80 coal-fired power stations or 40 nuclear power stations. It's nuts. Next slide. Okay, rooftop solar system, coming back to things people understand. 5 kilowatts maximum capacity over its 20 years of life. And by the way, it drops off at about 15 years. You could get them to go for about 25 years. But if you say, no, look, let's pretend it's 20 years and we'll pretend that it gave us 20 years full production, then you get 123,000 I think that's right, 123,271 kilowatt hours. Sorry about the three things. That's just Excel. I just did a cut and paste. The initial cost is 8,000 paid by the government, half paid by the government. Now, when you divide the kilowatt hours into the 8,000, you come to 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Well, that sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Except there's a little catch. If you were to say, oh, look, I've spent that $8,000. What would I have gotten out of that $8,000 if I invested it at 2% interest for 20 years? Well, the answer is $12,867. That brings the cost of your electricity to 10.4 cents per kilowatt hour. Next slide. It starts to get even.
I want to cut in. I don't know if your next slide covers this, but we've talked about this in the past. There's a fantastic article. I wish I had it here with me now. But it was talking about the problem with rooftop solar is when the sun's shining and all the rooftop solar across the state is pumping huge amounts of electricity back into the grid because it's producing excess energy.
Yep.
You can't turn your coal power plants off because you need them at night when the sun's not shining. But as we spoke about before, you can't just turn coal off willy-nilly. No. So you have to keep them dialed down, running in the background.
That's right.
So you're producing way too much energy, which drives the wholesale price below zero, which actually drives up the cost of producing coal energy. And it's a big reason why our electricity prices are going through the roof. So when you're talking about 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour or 10 cents,
that's unreliable electricity. I'm getting to that. That's intermittent electricity, where you're often producing electricity when you don't need it, just as you've alluded. And what you should do in a perfect world is take all that surplus energy and pump it up to some storage position so that at night you could let it run down and you'd have electricity.
So that's the idea behind the snowy hydro too.
Exactly.
But,
if they can only unbog the tunneling machine every now and again, it gets bogged for a couple of years. But so now we say, okay, look, we need storage. And you can either have storage as batteries, that's the battery energy storage system, or you can pump it up the hill. And I've already told you that you'll need 4 Warragamba dams to handle this. And by the way, when you talked about the cost, the price of the electricity drops down below zero, it actually doesn't in real terms. What you're talking about is what people are prepared to pay for it. That's quite distinctly different to what it costs you to produce it. Do you understand the difference? See, if somebody's selling something you don't want, then you can say, no, look, you'll have to pay me to take it, right? But it costs them an arm and a leg to produce it, and we're getting into that.
You mentioned it just before. It's producing energy when you least want it. So during the middle of the day when everyone's at work and they're not home and they're not using their air conditioning and their TVs and whatever, that's when it's producing the excess energy. But when people come home and the sun goes down,
then the base load generators have to start up, and they've only been half utilized. As I said, the very first slide, I told you that if you want cheap electricity, you've got to run your base load facilities at 100% of their capacity at 100% of their time. But if during the day you're producing all of this electricity, then you've got to shut down your base load facility. So you've got a whole lot of staff standing around. You've still got to maintain it. And then when the sun isn't shining, they've got to be able to leap into action. If it's a rainy day, they've got to turn up to work and do it. So you're faced with all the costs of running a base load facility, but you're not producing product to sell.
And it wouldn't be so bad if we had hilly terrain and you could build a lot of pumped hydro, but we just don't have that terrain.
That's right. That's right. And even when you do, we'll get to that anyway. We'll get to what pumped hydro really costs you. But now, because the power is intermittent, you need storage. And if you get a battery for your home, the R dropped off there. It has a life of around about 12 and a half years. And that's with the wind behind you. They often don't last that long at all. This is a lithium ion battery system. If it was lead acid, they last 4 to 5 years. So anyway, and that battery installation will cost you about $6,000 installed. So over 25 years, you've got to change out your battery system at the 12 and a half year mark, approximately. And if you do this sunk investment cost, 2 sets of batteries are going to set you back $37,518. That's compounding interest. Okay, so far?
Mm-hmm,
so this comes to 30 cents per kilowatt hour for the batteries. And if you then say, okay, the other one, my solar cells have cost me 10.44 cents per kilowatt hour, then the total cost of electricity with batteries at your home is 40.44 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, before Mr. Rudd came along, we were paying, at the sand mining company I was working for, we were paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour. That came to $40 a megawatt hour, but it was, we bought it in megawatts. But we were paying 4 cents, and now we're paying 40 odd.
A huge problem of all of this to actually have to go through and explain all this. A lot of people would probably switch off already and just say, "Look, out of sight, out of mind. As long as my TV turns on at the end of the day and." Blah, blah, blah.
Well, if you're a young couple and you're struggling to pay a mortgage and somebody says to you, look, you've got to pay an extra $2,000 a year for your electricity. By the way, we're up now, on top of the electricity costs, I'm paying $1.72 a day just for the connection. I didn't used to pay that back in 2007. We just paid an electricity bill and we paid 4 cents a kilowatt hour. I mean, they're ripping us in every possible direction. And it's the young and the vulnerable. It's the people who are renting and they don't have a solar system on their roof augmenting their power supply.
And that's the horrifying thing behind it. They're telling kids that the world's going to end so they can bring in this crap and the young people are going to have to pay for it.
I'm vehemently opposed to that. I want to help young people have the same wonderful life that I did. And it's achievable. We just have to get rid of the idiots. Okay, now cost of electricity with a solar pumped hydro system. When I did all of the sums, and you'll find it in my paper, I go and look at what dams cost and all the rest of it. You'll find that a pumped hydro system costs 21 cents per kilowatt hour. Next slide. That's what coal costs, and you can't really read it there, but over on the right-hand side, there's this sort of khaki-coloured things there. That's brown coal, and the middle one is basically 2.9 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what brown coal produces electricity at, and you've got the CSIRO trying to tell us that pumped hydro is cheaper than brown coal. Bull, you know the rest. Bull's droppings. It's rubbish. It's rubbish. Now, you can do this on a pad of paper in the space of a couple of hours. You can do the calcs. And interestingly, when I was at Birua, I went up to the representatives of the solar scheme. I said, what will electricity cost per kilowatt hour from your system delivered at a confidence level of 4 nines 24/7? They couldn't answer it. They didn't know. And I'm saying, hold on, I need a reset here. You mean we're about to spend billions of dollars on a project and we have no idea what the electricity is going to cost per kilowatt hour coming out of it? And they went, yeah, that's the case.
All they're relying on is emotion and virtue signaling and people feeling virtuous about implementing these projects, and they just want to feel good about themselves. And these politicians are hoping that they can ride on that without anyone doing the detail and the calculations and actually pulling this stuff apart. And people are
to quote a term from Miss Zali Stegel, our incumbent here in Warringah, she said, "Ride the new wave." Well, the new wave, what is this going to lead us to? We're going to be completely and utterly bankrupt and have no source of energy or power, because we're going to have this intermittent energy that
the Birrawa solar system is going to take up 15 square kilometres. 15 square kilometres of solar panels, 15 square kilometres of prime agricultural land is going to be taken up with solar panels. It's lunacy.
Well,
it's not going to produce cheaper electricity, and there's no reason to do it anyway, because carbon dioxide doesn't warm the Earth's atmosphere. There's no point in reducing emissions.
You mentioned Grant Piper before. He's done the calculations for the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone. 9 million solar panels are going to go in there. 9 million. Just think about the mining that goes into producing those solar panels. A lot of it comes from China. 80% of the world's supply for the components of solar panels come from China. So we're handing over our energy sovereignty and giving away our energy independence, and we're becoming energy dependent on China.
Yes.
No one ever takes...
It's worse than that, Stephen. The Chinese Communist Party companies are actually controlling the networks. We've sold these off to Chinese companies, and every company in China belongs to the Chinese Communist Party. That's the rules. You couldn't make this up, as my good friend Hoodie and John Larder would say.
Yeah.
If anybody's listening to me, vote these idiots out of Parliament. Get rid of them. Get rid of them. Bring in people like Malcolm Roberts, who's already in, by the way, but Craig Kelly's sitting there in the wing. He is a sensible person, and there are many other people like Craig Kelly and Malcolm Roberts over in the Libertarian Party. I went to their annual general meeting. There are a hell of a lot of very sensible and intelligent people in the Libertarian Party, and they think exactly the same way. We need to get rid of the Greens as a first priority. By the way, did you know that in around 1980, the Australian Communist Party closed, and about a year later, the Greens Party started, and the people who were in the Communist Party started the Greens Party? What does that tell you about the Greens Party?
It's not just that, Kevin. Sam Buno talks about this very comprehensively. The Greens, a lot of the Greens were old school environmentalists, but then they they amalgamated with one of the Socialist Alliance parties, and they were much smaller than the Greens, but they were far better organized, and they were far better politically, and they just
better funded, I might add too, by the way.
Yeah,
the funding was coming from foreign entities.
So it's no surprise that the Greens have essentially become a Marxist, socialist, communist, whatever you want to call it, party.
They're extremely dangerous. Extremely, and most Australians think it's all warm and fuzzy. That was the whole idea of the communists grabbing hold of the Greens movement, because they're dealing in something that makes everybody think, oh, they're warm and fuzzy, but they're not. They are extremely dangerous. And next we have the Labor Party. Now, the Labor Party's always had a close tie to the Communist Party, because communism and unionism go hand in glove. That's a fact. So the Labor Party, and by the way, the Labor Party after Hawke then morphed into fascist, where the quintessential definition of a fascist government is where it gets into bed with big business. And that is exactly what the Labor Party did, because you can't have big unions if you don't have big business. So that was the natural trend of the Labor Party. It's now a party of fascism. And then you've got the Liberals and the Nationals, and they're running around trying to get votes, and they prostitute the values of Menzies, and they're just losing people left, right, and centre. Because Dutton shows some promise, but Turnbull, Morrison, they were just hopeless, absolutely hopeless. So there you go.
Well,
you've got to get rid of them.
Every time the coalition has gone to an election opposing this climate change rubbish, net zero, and everything that comes along with it, they've won.
Yes. And what they do then, Stephen, is when they get into power, instead of going to the education department and saying, this is what you will teach our children, they let the teachers still teaching kids all this rubbish about carbon dioxide is warming the Earth's atmosphere and we've got to stop human emissions of carbon dioxide and the ice is melting and the seas are going to rise and yada, yada, yada. And also they're doing the same thing in the Aboriginal industry. You listen to what they're teaching in schools, they are defaming our ancestors. This country is a wonderful country. It has good reason to be very proud of what it has done and where it has come from. In 200 years, we built this country from nothing to what it is today. It's almost miraculous. And we've got teachers in schools telling our kids that we went around murdering the Aborigines and so forth. Nothing could be further from the truth. The real history of Australia is quite laudable. From the very beginning, when Europeans first set foot on this country, their mandate, their directions from the king was to treat the native people gently, and that the native people were British citizens. That's what British subjects, I think, was the word they used. But right from the beginning, we have tried to be inclusive of Aboriginal people. And that most probably is why we have so many people now of mixed race in our country, because there was intermarriage and integration. We've tried really hard to help Aboriginal people enjoy all the benefits of Australian life. I had an argument with some guy. Sorry.
I think the figure is about 70% of Aboriginal people intermarry with whites and other races.
I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, well, a lot to do is with the small numbers of, I mean, they're only 3% of the population. So you can, I mean, that's almost self-evident why that happens, but it does happen. And we need to be, I mean, that's a huge other issue. We could go into a whole big other podcast, but we've got another 3 slides to go in your presentation. So let's finish that off. And then I've got a few questions in the chat that I'd like to bring up from our wonderful audience. But this is, so we got to line number 3. Is there anything you want to finish up on this slide here?
No. We've gone into that exhaustively. So, you know, I've said there 4 times. Now, this is what happens when you inject intermittent power into the grid. The arrow there, where the curve is at its lowest, was before we started injecting intermittent power into the grid. And that green thing coming up from the bottom is intermittent power, the amount of intermittent power being injected into the grid. And you can see there's a correlation. The more intermittent power you inject into the grid, the more expensive electricity becomes, for the very reasons you've outlined.
Why can't Peter Dutton put this front and center on the Liberal Party website?
I travelled to Canberra at my own expense in December of 2019, before the COVID shamdemic, and I met with what's his name? Michael. Oh, goodness gracious, I've had a brain fade. The Deputy Prime Minister at the time.
Barnaby Joyce?
No. The one who was before him. He's such a memorable chap.
I mean, it's on the tip of my tongue. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, anyway, I met with him. I showed him those graphs, and he said, "Oh, I've never seen these graphs before." And I said, "Well, now you have. Go forth." Didn't hear anything from him. Not a bleat from him. Michael McCormack.
That's it. Yep. There you go.
What I often find is, you know, obviously when I'm on stage or when I'm talking like this, sometimes my mind goes into a lock, and all I have to do is just go, calm, and it'll come back. So, yeah. Okay, so you can see it. Now, I went and saw Michael McCormack, showed him those graphs, said, look, the world's cooling. It's all bullshit. Oh, pardon me, the French. And I even said, look, Richard Lindzen, Will Happer, yada, yada, yada. These are all people who are eminent atmospheric physicists, and they all say this is absolute rubbish. What are you doing? And he did nothing. He did nothing.
Are they afraid of going into the battle and having to argue this, or they're?
I don't know. But they're not leaders. They're not people that I would want representing me, representing my electorate. If they don't have the moral fibre to stand up and say something that is right, regardless of the fact it might not be popular, then they really shouldn't be there. We need elected representatives who will stand up for us. and who will say what is right and not be frightened of, the opprobrium that might attract.
And why can't they do podcasts like this explaining this stuff to the electorate?
Yeah, mate, I'm with you 100%. And if I was in government, I've told you already that if I had been elected to the seat of Ballina, it was my plan that every Friday night, 3 Fridays in a row, I would have a town hall meeting at Ballina, Byron Bay and Mullumbimby, and anybody in the electorate would be welcome to come along and they could ask me any question I wanted to. On the 4th week of the month, I would take a risk and consolidate all those issues which my constituents had raised. You never see that. Tamara Smith is the Greens representative for Ballina. You never see her. You never hear of her. She does nothing. I tried to see Justine Elliott and they locked me out of the office. I actually sent her a letter. On her website, a chap rang me up and said, "Oh, you want to see Justine?" I said, "Yeah, look, I'd like to come and have a talk with her. And I only want 20 minutes of her time. I just want to show her the graphs." And he said, "Oh, what do you want to talk about?" I said, "Well, look, I'd like to talk to Justine, not you, but I want to talk to her about the fact that the Earth's climate is cooling. I've got graphs and yada, yada, yada." He said, "Oh, look, send me an email." So I sent an email and didn't get a reply back. Now, I'm a member of ACA and I'm actually their electoral representative for this area. So I went back to the leaders of the ACA and said...
So just explain what the ACA is.
The Australian Coalition Alliance, I think it's called. Basically, it's an organisation which I just call it the ACA, but it's an organisation that has linked together all of the different small groups around Australia where there is a common interest. And they say they've got somewhere between 1.7 and 4 million members now.
Oh, you're talking about the Aligned Council of Australia.
That's it. That's the one. Thank you.
Yep.
Once again, if my mind relaxed, I'd be able to pull that out. But I just call them the ACA. It's easier, right? They've got so much head running around inside the scone. So, yeah. And so we decided we would deliver to Justine Elliott my papers. I'd written a paper and I had all the stuff attached. I put it in an envelope. We took it up there and she locked the office. She wouldn't let us in. So, what type of representatives are this?
Well, they don't want to have to argue the case with you.
I love the ACA, by the way. I love what they stand for. They're fabulous.
So, okay. So, look, your presentation tonight has been...
Oh, have you got... Is there another slide, by the way?
Yeah, well, I was going to say your presentation has been amazing, but of everything you've presented, I love this slide the most. This is a fantastic bit of information.
Yeah. Look, the blue line is the CPI. The red line is the cost of electricity. It's called the electricity index. And you'll notice that it was actually moving negatively with regard to the CPI. So in other words, electricity was getting cheaper in real terms up until Rudd came to office. And then once Rudd got in there, that's when you can see what happened. It just went poof.
So you can see at the top there, you have the Howard era, and then it moves. That's in blue, and then in that kind of maroon color is Rudd Gillard Rudd, and you can see the red line just spike. It just went straight up. Yeah. And then in there you have a small section of Abbott, which it started to dip a little bit under Abbott.
Yep.
Turnbull starts to spike again. Surprise, surprise. Under Scott Morrison, it starts to come down and then up, and then it starts to rise again with Albanese.
And by the way, those dips were most probably artificially generated. They didn't really get cheaper. It's just that the government was doing stuff like using taxpayers' funds to augment things and subsidising electricity providers and etc. So I treat those things with a grain of salt. But the fact of the matter is that if you were to draw a line from 2007 to the top of that curve, it's a very steady upwards go.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's clear as day, but you still get people like Chris Bowen saying renewables are the cheapest form of energy and blah, blah, blah.
No, very, very silly man. The very dangerous man. In fact, in the case of Albanese, he was the president of the Communist Party at university. His nickname was Trots, by the way, at university, which was short for Trotsky.
Yeah.
And he's still a communist. He still believes in collectivism. He still believes in, government controlling the industry, taking away. Everybody's got to conform. Individualism. Forget about the middle class or small business. They're out to slaughter us all. It's all for big business. I told you it's a fascist government.
Well, unfortunately, he believes in censorship as well. So
That's
we need
right.
to get this
That's part of
information out
fascism.
there. Yeah,
Yep.
we need to get this information out there right now, because if they bring in misinformation, disinformation laws, well, guess what's going to happen? They're going to brand this as misinformation straight away. So
yeah, well, you'll notice also that the public servants play a strong role in this, and the public service is heavily unionised, more unionised than any other industry. And the consequence of that is that the unions are actually the brown shirts of the Labor Party. The Labor Party is the political arm, a little bit like Sinn Féin in Ireland for the IRA. But we have a one-party state, because the reality is the Labor Party are permanently entrenched in our public service. And if you get a government that's anti-Labor, the public servants will just slow walk everything. And whenever there's something embarrassing, they'll leak it. They'll white ant the government of the day. We've got to actually treat the public service like we do the defence forces. You should not be allowed to be in a union when you're in the public service. You can belong to an association, just like there's the Defence Force Association. Don't have a problem with that. But you can't be a member of a union. And you should not be donating money to the Labor Party, which is what they do.
yeah. All right, final slide. This is your conclusion.
Okay. There's no point in reducing CO2 emissions, as I've told you. Solar and wind generation systems are far more expensive than coal-fired generation facilities, especially when storage, distribution, and the disposal of the systems at the end of their short life is taken into account. Australia is approximately $1.3 trillion in debt when both federal and states' debt is taken into account. Buying solar and wind appliances from communist China to put this country even further into debt whilst destroying the competitiveness because of expensive energy is both stupid and is reckless, endangering the nation's economy and its security. We've got to vote them out. You've got to get rid of the four parties. You've got to vote for One Nation, Libertarian, Australian Federation Party, Independents. An independent is a really effective advocate for your electorate because they won't be intimidated by party policies. They'll go in there and they will bat for you. And what's more, the parties then have to court the independents in order to get any bill passed. So
Well,
as
just
an
make sure-
independent, you have a
just
lot
make sure
more
they're not-
power.
Make sure they're not teal independents.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you vote for a person, don't vote for the party. Parties are actually corrosive to democracy. I've told you that before. We have a bicameral system of government. That is to say, we have an upper house and a lower house. But if you've got strong parties in the lower and the upper house, the same strong parties, then the upper house doesn't act as a house of review any longer. The legislation just gets a wave through to become law. So political parties are really poisonous to democracy. They serve a purpose as a melting pot of ideas, but we've allowed them to dominate. Above and below the line voting means that no independent has been elected to the Senate since they brought in above and below the line voting. It was organised by the political parties. We are on a very dangerous slope as a country. You saw that in COVID. You saw what they could do to you in COVID. Lock you down, stop you from leaving the country, coerce you to take a poisonous substance into your body, deny you early treatment, which would have cured you within about 6 hours. This is and they're getting away with it. They've given themselves, King's Day honor, King's birthday honours, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I had that. It's just, I mean, they're just laughing at us. Really, they're just completely and utterly.
Vote them out. If you vote them out, if you put new people into Parliament who are like me, who have my sentiments and your sentiments and the sentiments of many of our friends, then we can put these people in front of courts of law and put them away in jail. For what they've done, they've committed atrocities. They shouldn't be rewarded with honours. They should be pilloried.
Kevin, that was absolutely fantastic, as always. So, look, everyone watching, what Kevin needs you to do, he needs you to go to the Independent Planning Commission of New South Wales website. He needs you to scroll down to the Birrawa Solar Farm and make a submission. And if we can get enough submissions from people, then hopefully Kevin will have the opportunity to speak at the Independent Planning Commission. And what is the main aim of you speaking? You're hoping to cancel every solar and wind project in New South Wales, is that right?
That's correct. And you know, as you were talking, I was thinking, you know, I've left one critical thing out, and thankfully you're a fantastic host, Stephen. Thank you very much. Look, what I'm doing with the Independent Planning Commission, and I've said this out loud, I've actually written to them. I've said, I've now shown you that a whole lot of eminent scientists say that CO2 does not warm the Earth's atmosphere. Reinforcing that, I've shown you graphs which indicate around the world the temperature has been dropping for the last 140 years. And these temperature measurements were made by independent teams who could not collaborate. And therefore, there is a very, very high probability those trends are accurate. And what I've also shown you is that by my calculations, the cost of electricity from the systems which you're presently thinking of approving are many times greater than electricity produced by coal. And therefore, you, the Independent Planning Commission, have an obligation, have a responsibility to stop these projects. You have an obligation to find out, to do an audit and accurately determine what the cost of electricity will be coming out of the Birrawa solar plant. And if that is more expensive than coal, you have an obligation to stop it immediately, and then you should do the same to every other project that involves wind or solar in New South Wales. And that would then flow on to the whole of the country. So I want everybody to put pressure on the Independent Planning Commission, because they will try, I am fairly sure they will try to ignore me, but I'm going to be insistent. I insist that they conduct a forensic financial audit of what this electricity is going to cost in order to determine that it is indeed cheaper than coal. If it is not, it's got to stop, because it's massive environmental destruction that these projects involve. Taking prime farmland and covering it with either windmills, which are destroying our apex predators, like the eagles and so forth, and the owls and the bats, and it's just destroying our farmland. And what's more interestingly, the question of decommissioning is still up in the air. There has been no stated policy. These companies do not have to put a bond down to clean it up, and there is a rumor that it is the landowner that will be left with the cost of decommissioning these facilities when they reach the end of their life or usefulness.
Apparently it is in some of the contracts, but the concern is that if these solar panel projects and wind projects, if the company that has installed them then sells it off to another company, then it will be the farmer or the landowner left holding the bag.
Yep.
So
or the taxpayer.
Yes.
The taxpayer.
And what do you think is going to happen when you want to try and remove the foundations for one of these wind towers?
You won't.
I mean,
what you would do is cover it. No, you just cover it with soil. That's all you could do. You put down then terra mat over the soil. I'm experienced in this in land reclamation, in sand mining, but you just cover it with soil, and then you put down terra mat, and then you revegetate. That's all you can do. And it's no different to a basalt outcrop. You know, we have basalt outcrops coming up to the surface all over our country because we have the thinnest amount of topsoil of any continent in the world. So, yeah.
Okay, Kevin. I've got a whole bunch of questions in the chat. We might do these rapid fire because I think there's some really good stuff in here. The first question is from Tony. Are the slides on Kevin's website?
Yes, they are. Yes, they're all there.
So are they under this climate change tab?
Yep. And you'll find that I've got down there. You could read it. I can't. But hold on. I might be looking at this in the wrong. No, I can't expand my screen any larger than it already is. But you'll find why CO2 cannot warm the Earth's atmosphere. It's down there near the red. Can you see it there? Just move your no, go down, slide down.
Slide down. CO2 has no appreciable
that's
effect
it.
on.
Yep. If you click on that just to demonstrate to our viewers.
No, it's not letting me click on it for some reason.
Oh, okay. Well, there'll be a link somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, check out Kevin's website. Click on the
there.
climate change. Yeah. What about if someone wants to make a submission to the Independent Planning Commission and they say, "Well, I'm not good at writing. I wouldn't even know what to say, but I really want to do it." Is there a template they can use?
Yeah. Look, write to me, or you can go to a lovely lady called Lynette LeBlack. She's doing Legion work. So yeah, if people would like to write to me, it's kevinl@kevinloughrey.com.au. I don't mind people writing to me.
Okay, you might be opening up a can of worms now.
Well,
Richard Sorkin's got your email.
I'm happy to do that.
Speaking of Mr. Storch, he's got a question. Kevin, we must have you back to talk about the wanton and inexcusable destruction of the viable sand mining operation on South Stradbroke Island.
Yes, and yeah. I was the engineering superintendent on that thing, and we used to take environmentalists up in a Land Cruiser to where we had been mining, and we'd go down a path and we'd say, please pick which side is the mined side and which side is the rejuvenated side, and they'd get it wrong every time because the rejuvenated side always looked more vibrant because it was newer bush. They'd get it wrong. And look, the level to which we had to restore, we'd go in and survey. So all the dunes were put back in exactly the same position they were before. This was done at an enormous expense, by the way. I mean, a lot of it was so unnecessary, but we had to do it. And you wouldn't believe this, but we used to collect monazite, which is thorium oxide, and it's radioactive. And we then had to go and spread the monazite back into the dunes to bring the dunes back to the same level of radioactivity that they were at before we came along. That's how stupid governments are. And thorium's really quite a useful material, especially for nuclear. It produces a lot of energy if you want to have a thorium reactor, or you use it as a thorium blanket in a conventional reactor.
Just think what we could be, Kevin. But we've got a comment here or a question here from Pauline. This is a whole podcast in itself. Would the Bradfield scheme take away the need for wind and solar?
Absolutely. The Bradfield scheme would also allow you to very efficiently generate electricity, because you'd be using when it flows downhill, what you would do is pump it up to holding places in the ranges and then let it run down into the Murray-Darling system, and you would generate electricity while you were doing that, and you would be increasing the flow in the Murray-Darling for the farmers and tripling the food production capability of Australia. You'd end up with another three Murrumbidgee irrigation areas if you did what we're talking about with the Bradfield scheme.
The kahuna on Rumble. I love these Rumble names. A lot of us say political parties are unlawful and are not mentioned in the Commonwealth Constitution.
They aren't unlawful, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. And I think you'll find that the High Court would take a similar view. But I'm going to try and do a High Court challenge regarding above and below the line voting. And this has already been contested in the High Court before, but I want to take to the justices new arguments. They didn't turn around and say political parties are unlawful. They said people have the option to vote below the line, or they can vote party-wise above the line. So the justices saw no problem with political parties existing. As I've already expressed my view that it's very much in our interests as a democracy to try and favour independence, not favour political parties. Political parties are corrosive to our democracy.
Well, Adam Zara proposes having the upper house just full of independents, not having any political parties.
Yeah. Well, it once was that the governor used to select the elite of the colony to be in the upper house. They didn't get voted. And they would advise the governor, and the hoi polloi would be voted in the Legislative Assembly. And that's really not a bad way to go, because then you get contention between the two groups and everything gets argued out, and the public get to learn of all of the different aspects relating to a particular issue. Whereas when you have strong parties, people are censored, they're muffled, they're stifled, and they're not allowed to say what they're thinking in Parliament, because they'll earn the ire of the party.
Here's a comment, not a question, from Tony, but I think I'll read this out because it is interesting. I always challenge people to point out where the 1980s open-cut mines were throughout the Upper Hunter. They can't believe when I reveal they are below successful agricultural properties.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, good one, Tony. Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know anything about this because it was well before my time, but I'm interested in your thoughts about this. There was a referendum when Sir Robert Menzies was Prime Minister to ban the Communism Party in Australia.
Right. In 1950 odd. Yeah, look, Sir Robert Menzies saw the Communist Party as being a real threat to democracy, and he was right. And he wanted to ban the Communist Party because they were actually treasonous. They were doing their best to undermine the government of Australia, to undermine democracy. They wanted to have a communist regime. And with the Labor Party, they've just about achieved it. But and he took that to a referendum and he lost. And besides which, the High Court also had opined that he couldn't do it. And that's why he took it to a referendum. Now, with regard to above and below the line voting, if I'm unsuccessful in the High Court, my intention is to take it to the people and actually have it banned in our Constitution at all levels of government within the Commonwealth. I believe that if I explain to the people of Australia why above and below the line voting is not in their interests, they would agree with me, and they would agree then to a change of the Constitution to specifically ban it. And that'll mean then the justices of the High Court won't have a say in it. And that's the way it should be.
Mate, I don't know how you store this knowledge in your head. We could have you on every single week and be blown away with everything that you know and how you come up with all this information in such a concise way. Unfortunately, with this issue, it is very technical. And it does take an engineer to be able to explain a lot of these issues. And I think that is a big problem. I think people are just not willing to look that deeply into this issue. And they just rely on, the little fuzzy feeling they get when people say to them and pat them on the back, you're saving the world because you're moving to a net zero future. Whereas the dangers of it are immense. They're unavoidable. And we really need to be steering the ship away from all this stuff.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about Peter Dutton coming out and saying that they're not going to adhere to the net zero targets of the Paris Agreement, and a little bit more information needs to come out exactly where he's going to stand on that. But is that a move in the right direction for Peter Dutton? It is.
Look, if I were Peter Dutton, I would contact Will Happer. I'll tell you a little story about Will Happer. I met him up in Brisbane. I'd been corresponding with him, and he and I belonged to a group called Clintel, which stands for Client Intelligence. And I met up with Will, and I said to him, look, Will, I'm thinking about having a run for the Senate, but I'm a bit worried about my age. And he said, how old are you? I said, I'm 72. He said, what's wrong with you? I'm 82. Go for it, boy. And so that's Will Happer. But coming back to Peter Dutton, I mean, that's the sort of guy he is, and it relates to what I'm about to tell you. What Peter Dutton ought to do is get Richard Lindzen and pay them. I mean, he can easily, the Liberal Party and the National Party could easily afford to pay to do this. But he could get the Richard Lindzen, Will Happer and John Clauser together on a podcast just like this and ask them questions. Now, that would really make the news. I mean, ADH TV would love it. Sky News would be onto it. It'd be in The Guardian. You know, it would be worldwide news if Peter Dutton got those three people into a room and said, and even like I could be there too, even though I'm nowhere near as qualified as that, but I'd show my graphs. I said, look, these are the graphs. And Will, who has read my paper, would say, yeah, no, the graphs are right. Willie Soon is another person who should be there. Willie Soon actually showed graphs very similar to mine, where he's showing that the temperature rises with solar radiation. Got nothing to do with the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's all to do with how brightly the sun shines. Simple as that. So, you imagine we get Peter Dutton into a room, do that. You think what effect that would have?
Mate, that would be a real game changer. But I want to bring up something very quickly. I know we probably should finish up, but as you know, I'm a surveyor and I work night shift, and a big part of what I do is I have to input the atmospheric pressure and temperature and the humidity into my instrument. What I find is every night the weather is quite stable from night to night to night. The air pressure, the humidity, the temperature is very, very stable. It doesn't fluctuate much at all. But when I work day shift, it does. So what impact is the sun having on all those three elements? The pressure, the temperature, and the humidity. For my just observations of being a surveyor for way too long, 17 years or whatever it's been, and just thinking about that
experiment. Yeah.
Well, it's
related to Bernoulli's equation. Well, Bernoulli's equation says that enthalpy in a cell of air is the algebraic sum of the thermal component, the kinetic component, and the potential energy. And I'll turn that into real terms. The thermal component is the specific heat of the mass of air multiplied by its temperature in degrees Kelvin. The kinetic component is a half mv squared, where m is the mass of the air and v is its velocity. And the potential energy of the cell is the pressure. Okay, because, just like pressure in a piston, it will push a piston apart and do work. Now, if you've got the sun shining, you get air convecting. The land heats up, and so the air comes up off the land and the cooler air comes in underneath. So you get wind, and you've got a Coriolis effect because the earth is spinning. And the consequence of that is that during the day, the air's got a lot more kinetic energy. And so the air actually gets a little bit cooler because the energy transfers from the thermal component across into the kinetic component. Is this making sense? And also, when you get air moving, you get a lowering of the pressure. As an example, when you've got a storm, which involves lots and lots of wind and so forth, you've got a low pressure cell, like a cyclone. And that's what you're measuring. So at night, because there's no sun shining, there's less wind, and unless there's a storm, of course, coming down. And you're noticing that, hey, everything's fairly consistent. But during the day, when the sun's shining and the wind's starting to blow and you're getting all of this turbulence happening, I get all of these variations.
That is another good point. The wind does rarely blow at night. It does. I mean, it does happen, but it's very
Well, that's why I said when you've got a cell coming down or something like that. Now, that's the value, by the way, of a weather balloon versus a satellite trying to read how much energy is in a cell. Because with a weather balloon, you can measure the specific heat of the air. You can measure its temperature very accurately. You can measure the velocity of the air at that stage, and you can measure the pressure that's there. So you can then calculate the total enthalpy that exists in that particular cell at that particular time. Measuring the temperature alone is really a very crude metric to determine how much energy is in a cell of air.
Fantastic, Kevin. You blow me away, mate. So, look, if you want to, as I said in the beginning, head to Kevin's website, kevinloughrey.com.au. There's so much information packed into there. You can get lost in there for days if you wanted to, with all the information. This was just one little tidbit of the information on Kevin's website. So all the graphs and everything that we displayed tonight
should be there. If not, Kevin's given out his email. You want to give out your email again if anyone wants to contact you directly?
Kevin L, as in Kevin Loughrey, at kevinloughrey.com.au. Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. And also head to the Independent Planning Commission. This is the big reason why we've done this podcast tonight. Scroll down, as we said, hit this Birrawa wind farm submission. And if you want a template or something, again, email Kevin. There's only four days left. We want to get in as many submissions as possible. So please get on there and flood them with share this out, email all your friends and say we need to get the submissions in quick, because I would love to see Kevin in front of the Independent Planning Commission with a good amount of time to be able to really present his information to these people and hopefully enlighten them. I don't think you're going to have much of a chance, because I don't know, sometimes it's like yelling at a brick wall with these people, but
we'll see. This will be a test of the Independent Planning Commission, because I'm really painting them into a corner. They've got to tell me how much per kilowatt hour this electricity is going to cost. I think that's quite reasonable, don't you? I mean, if you're going to spend millions and millions, billions of dollars on a project, you should know what you're going to get out of it. They don't. They haven't a clue.
It's just crazy. But before we go, I want to let everyone know about a podcast that's just popped up on our platform as well. It's called the Global Discussion Forum. It's a new one that will be fortnightly. It's a multinational podcast with some great guys in the UK, especially Mr. Lee Evans, who's the chairman of CIB UK and Facts4EU.org. He is heading up as a chairman of this new podcast. We had Catherine McBride on the last episode. She talked about trade relations between the UK and Australia. So if you see that one pop up on our platform, check it out. Kevin was on there as well. He asked some really good questions. So it's an interesting one. And also take this information, this podcast today, share it with everyone that you know. If you can get as many people as you can to make submissions to the Independent Planning Commission, I think that would be fantastic. I say it every single week. Please share this information. It is very important. We heavily rely on our audience to share out this information. I wish I was much better with social media, but unfortunately I'm not. So please, if you can help us, get it out there, get people to learn this stuff, especially if you've got kids. If you've got children and they've been brainwashed with this stuff, I'm sure they could sit down and listen to this while they're meant to be doing their homework, because this would be probably better than them doing their homework. I know that's probably really bad advice, but we need to start exposing the younger generation to this information as well, because I just cringe with the stuff that they're being presented with in the schools and on TV and in the media and through movies and everything like that. So, Kevin, thank you very much for coming on tonight. Do you have any closing comments before we head off?
No, mate. I'm pretty exhausted, but I'm so grateful. Thank you very, very much, Steve. You do a fantastic job, mate.
Thank you to you, Kevin. Thank you to Richard, who called in, and thank you very much to all the people who commented live in the chat. I really appreciate all your comments and questions. It really adds to these interviews. So thank you very much for watching live. And remember, share, get this out there. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with anyone you can think of, because it's incredibly important. And look, if we just keep chipping away and presenting these arguments out there, we're going to prevail. If we do nothing, then we have to do something. We have to get active. And the more that we can present this information out there, the better, and hopefully we'll have a win at the 11th hour, but we'll get there in the end. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time.